Hi, I'm Martyn, and welcome to our extension of a previous favourite show on Heart and Hand, Murray and Me, where I allowed David Edgar to relive his experience with the former Rangers chairman. We thought we'd finished it. We thought we'd exhausted every question you could possibly ask. And then, of course, the second season of Sunderland Till I Die came onto our screens this week, which David has prompted a lot of people to want to know more about his second in command, of course, the infamous Martyn Bain, and hence this is the bane of my life. David, how are you?
I'm good. I'm surprised you didn't get in a Martyn Ramsay just to distance yourself in your intro there. You're Martyn with a Y, though he's Martyn with an I, and you always tell me to watch out for those people. So here's an example that'll back up your argument. Yeah, I'm good. I'm enjoying Sunderland Till I Die like everyone else. I sincerely hope that it never happens to my club. I really don't want to become a national joke, which is what this has happened. But there is a bit of me, a strong part of me actually, that thinks that Martyn Bain will quite enjoy the attention and really won't be bothered how he's seen so long as he's seen.
Well, let's start with that. Let's start with the documentary, because we wouldn't be here if talking about this if Netflix hadn't released their second season of it. Is it a case of that any publicity is good publicity, any attention is good attention? You're right. I would die inside if Rangers had, certainly over the last 10 years, had allowed such access. It makes for brilliant television.
The Craig Mather either.
Yeah, exactly. And there's probably few clubs that would make such good television than Rangers over the last decade, so thankfully not. A club in Sunderland's position, just relegated, and I don't know the ins and outs of the contract and how many years they were signed up for and all that, but didn't need that pressure. They do not need that pressure, given how difficult life was last season, or 2 seasons ago in last season. And that intrusion, that access, that added thing in the back of players' minds. And you're only going to say yes to that if you lack insight and can't move out of a room because of your ego.
No, I don't think he is. All publicity is good publicity. You know, I think if it was something that was critical, I remember the story about Willie Mackay and him with their houses in France that alleged some dodgy dealings, and he wasn't best pleased about that. So no, I don't think he would totally. But I think that there are people in life, brilliantly set up by David Brent, the character of David Brent, that are just born with no embarrassment chip, and they're just born with the no cringe factor. And Martyn Bain is one of them. Now, I'm often accused of being arrogant, and in ways I am, but I'm arrogant with an ability to see my own ridiculousness. Doesn't always save me, but at least means afterwards I can see and hopefully learn from it. Whereas there are people who are just incredibly self-satisfied, incredibly content with who they are, and those people tend not to notice what other people think of them because they are consumed by what they think of themselves. And I would place Martyn Bain very much in that category.
Sorry, but he, when the documentary arose, the opportunity, he would not, I don't think, have seen that as, this could be good exposure for Sunderland Football Club. This could be really interesting. This is my time. He will have seen that actually this is going to be about me. And that's the David Brent thing. I've got something I've been wanting to say for ages. People need to know the real me and need to know about my life and my thoughts on everything. And here is my chance. And any, how does that impact the players? Do we really need that this season? We want to bounce straight back up. This is difficult. Owners try to sell. It's a bit of a shit show. All of that's just cast aside. And I mean, he must have, I'm sure one of those interviews, with the same setting, same suit on, same day, the weather didn't change outside. He must have had 4 different watches on in the same conversation.
Well, yeah, apparently he wanted to wear a different watch in every interview if possible. And again, things like that frighten me and maybe indicate why we clash so much, because I do that. I wear a different watch at every one of our live shows, as you know, and take the piss out of me for. I've got this thing about matching my clothes, so
every 20 minutes.
I can't go out. No, I wouldn't bring
on, guys. Hold on. I need to change. You've seen this one. You need to see that. You need to see the lot.
I wouldn't bring 5 watches to work. No. So, but again, I think it is just everything pumped up to 11. He's Spinal Tap, and that is, I think he just doesn't have that stopping point, because you're absolutely right. The first thing that you or I or our listeners would think if someone pitched a doc to come and follow us at our work is David Brent. That's the first thing we think of. That how am I going to come across in this? I'm going to, they have to make me look a bit foolish to make the TV programme work. This is a long-established model now. We know this. And they've got to pick up on the ridiculousness of the situation. I think when they was approached about the documentary, that Bain thought 2 things. One, that they were going to bounce back immediately and his genius would be recognised. And that was not an uncommon view, not the genius part, but that Sunderland were going to bounce up. They were among the season's favourites. And 2, you mentioned there, this is my time. This is a guy who had always worked beneath the shadow of someone bigger. And here was his opportunity to say, look, I am running this club, even though there's an owner. Towards the end of his time at Rangers, he was running Rangers, when Murray had lost all interest. But he was never seen as being the person who was doing that. It was always seen as being, first of all, Murray, and then, really towards the end, Alistair Johnston. Mm. So I think he thought, I'm going to come out and I'm going to show who I am. And he's a good-looking man, he's well-dressed, well-built. I think he thought that I'll be good for television and other people might look ridiculous in this, but I won't, because I'm very confident that I know what I'm doing in terms of my own image and my own media presence. But I think what comes across in this, incidentally, is his lack of media training, because one of the things he does repeatedly is something that I had to learn how to do, because I made the mistake early on. When you're being interviewed by anyone, really, but especially by a news show, you are asked the same question repeatedly, and you have to give the same answer, the Ed Miliband thing, because you will at one point just say something, and it might be a throwaway line, but that's the one they'll use. And throughout this documentary, he'll make a wee joke or give an aside that makes him look ridiculous, which I don't know the full context of that quote. And again, I think that showed, for all his experience in a certain side of football, it wasn't in front of a camera, it wasn't in front of a live mic. And I don't know how anybody would cope, Martyn, with having one about all the time. We all say daft things, and we all do daft things, and we all do things that, taken completely out of context and taken by people that don't know us, would look silly. So yeah, he went for it, and he has made himself, a figure of fun. I think it will rankle with him, but I think he'll bounce back from it pretty quickly.
Okay, we're here because you had interaction with him, you had dealings with him in your role at the Rangers Supporters Trust. If anyone hasn't, if you're new subscribers to the site, you've maybe missed through the archives, Murray and me, I would urge you to go and listen to that, maybe as a preamble to this. But, Bain was quite a heavy part of those discussions, I imagine, David, or at least his presence would have been if he was just fetching you tea or whatever. But what were your early impressions? Let's start at the beginning of your interactions with Martyn Bain.
Well, I think that I didn't arrive with a blank slate about him. And I think that, in fairness, I've got to point that out, that he had been around the club by this point for almost a decade. I mean, I first get involved in 2006, or 2005, sorry, and he'd been around since 1996. at Rangers. And for the first few years, as he makes his rise up at Rangers, we don't really hear too much about him because this is full-on Murray era. But by 2005, we'd had the time when Murray had stepped away between 2002 2004, and Bain had taken a more prominent role alongside John McClellan. And therefore, I did have in my head an image of him. So I think I've got to be fair to that and say that I wasn't arriving neutral about him. I think that it would be misleading to say that I turned up, just I don't know who this guy is. I did, and I had an impression of him. I did, though, think that he would be different behind closed doors to what he was like in the interactions that I'd seen him have, be it at AGMs or rare interviews or whatever. And I've met a lot in my career what you might term alpha males. And the problem with alpha males is that they assume that everyone else has the same buttons that they do, and that they react in the same way to things that they do because they can't really see out with a bubble or realise that there are people who might not necessarily be motivated by what they're motivated by. They might accept that there are people who don't have what they have because they've got talent and they are, alpha men, but they think we want it. And I think that he was very much like that, which is why him and Murray got on, because they both understood that they were very similar, but they understood their positions of, master and servant, and it really was. So because he was similar to Murray but didn't challenge him and was never likely to outshine him and never wanted to outshine him, then his position was very secure within the club and within the hierarchy. But they were both very much, look at me, look at what I represent, look at how important I am, respect this. The incident I described with Murray with a phone call, the £25 million deal. There was a lot of that in Bain, and understandably, because he's working next to this guy who is hugely successful, and he clearly wants to, there's an aspirational thing there, and this is his mentor, and that's undeniable. This is a guy he's worked very, very closely with. This is the guy who he admired, although he would, when Murray wasn't at meetings, he would make jokes about him, and he would take the piss. So I think it's probably important to suggest that Martyn Bain has a type of intelligence. He is an intelligent man. He's not emotionally intelligent. That's the difference.
Yeah.
I know that's a very modern concept, but it is true, and we all know what we mean by it. It's just the current buzzword for it. But he is an intelligent guy, and he was a very good politician, which is why he negotiated his way up through Ibrox. That's why he dealt with rivals. Nick Peel springs to mind, who was a commercial director there, a very good commercial director, incidentally, who made a lot of money for Rangers, and he was eased out because Bain wanted him gone, and he secured a lot of power under David Murray because Murray wasn't interested what happened below his level. So what Bain did was say, I am going to make all of this my fiefdom, because he doesn't care. He's not a micromanager. He's not going to bother about who's doing what. He just gives his commands and expects it to be done, and I'll make sure I'm the only voice within the club he's dealing with. And that's what he did very successfully. First time I met him, I immediately thought he was quite oily, but again, I have to go back to maybe I thought that going in, and it's confirmation bias. But he was very confident, very self-assured. I thought there was that slight sneering contempt thing going on, of trying to establish very early on, I'm the MD of this club. I'm very important. I'm only seeing you because I have to, and you guys should be aware. You should be grateful for my time. And there was always an undercurrent of that throughout his days. And a phrase he used a lot is, if you guys knew the full picture, if you guys could see what was going on, you don't understand. Always that undercurrent of, I'm much more intelligent than you. And there were always those feelings. He didn't like to be challenged because he didn't get challenged except by one person. And he learned over the years how to deliver news to that person in a way that meant he wouldn't be challenged and he wouldn't be criticised. So despite being hugely confident, which he is, he was incredibly thin-skinned, I felt, even within a one-on-one meeting or a one-on-three meeting, as it would generally be, because we always had 3 people from the trust. He would be very prickly to any perceived criticism. And he's one of these guys who, I don't know if he needed praise or he just wanted praise, but if he felt he wasn't getting it, he would give you the opportunity to do it. He would provide you with the setup. I remember one time we were sitting talking about the summer transfer business, and he said, yeah, I got us $500,000 from the Moochie. I did well there, lads? And, that was not an uncommon thing, praise me. So on the one hand, he's dismissive of you because he thinks he's more impressive than you. But on the other hand, he needed your approval. And that was similar to Murray. That's what, sorry?
That's all insecurity, though. It's the same as the 4 watches and everything else. It's a man that's not comfortable in his own skin. It's a front, because the image that he's portraying to you immediately doesn't need to receive any other praise. It doesn't need that affirmation from the body of the Kirk, which is what you represent.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. I wouldn't, need it. I don't need to be loved, but I did. So I understand that, for years I was a people pleaser. And, I needed that approbation. The thing I always joke about, I could do an interview, with a Beeb or Real Radio or whatever, and go and follow. I would go on immediately to see what people thought of it.
Yeah.
And if there were 100 comments and 99 of them were positive and one of them was negative, I couldn't sleep at night for that one, So I get it. It took me to be broken down by alcoholism and, to rebuild myself and say, do you know what, I'm an alcoholic, for Christ's sake. So, I can't really hold myself up as being, I'm just like, I've got my weaknesses and my foibles. And once you accept that, life's a hell of a lot easier, and I've certainly found it that way. But yeah, you're right, it's an insecurity, and I think that he felt the reason for his insecurity, Martyn, was if we went to a meeting that Murray was supposed to be at and he wasn't there and Bain was, we would express our disappointment. And I think to him, he was like, you've got me. Do you know who I am? You've got the MD of Rangers here. And we'd be like, yes, but, we're the best in the world. We don't have the organ grinder. And I think he bristled at that. So I think that constant knowledge of no matter what he did, he would always be seen as number 2. I do think that helped create that sort of neediness in him, where no matter what he did at Rangers, he would never get the praise he felt he deserved. Equally, and I will praise him later on, by the way, in this show, I will praise him for achievements, but equally, I felt, well, you're wanting credit for things, but are you going to front up for the blame? Because Murray, rightly or wrongly, maybe didn't agree with the blame, but he did get it.
Mm. The direct criticism and the bristling, any good examples of that, and bring us into the room?
Well, I think the big one I can remember is going on Real Radio after David Murray should have sacked Alex McLeish after the infamous, he's got 5 games to save his job, we don't win any of them, he's staying. What? And I was raging, genuinely angry. I mean, you'll remember how you felt that day. I'm sure you were.
Yeah.
Similar. Yeah, what? And I went on Real Radio, and I was, over emotional, and I did, and I gave Murray it, and just as again a throwaway line, I said, aye, and Smithers there doing his bidding, Martyn Bain. And, immediately, like literally just coming off, text from Bain, that was bang out of order. And he phoned me later that night and he was raging, absolutely raging. And I mean, words were had. He's like, that is so unfair and there was no need for that. And I thought you were a professional and you're not acting professionally. So, how can we trust you moving forward? And as me being me, the fact that I think that you're, not very good at your job doesn't mean I'm not professional. And, an argument was had, but a few days later, he phones up, he invites us into Ibrox for a chat. He was very emollient, very smooth, very unctuous is probably the right word. But he kind of, as if he'd sort of calmed down from it. But I think I had more of an insight into his personality from the original moment rather than from the, right, I've got my mask back on now. Yeah. In meetings, we'd be sitting and we'd complain about, ticket allocations. We'd complain about the financial situation of the club. And he would say to you things, you would say, look, we don't get where you're going with this. What's the plan for this? And he's like, do you expect us to reveal the plan to you? And I'm like, no, but is there a plan? That's the key thing. Or one of his real pet hates is, the chairman told us this would happen and it hasn't. And he's in the difficult position of, he knows that if Murray was there, he'd say, I never said that. But he knows he did say it. So he is kind of torn between, do I look like a tit in front of these people by saying he never said that when they know he did and I know he did? Or do I follow the party line? And what he would do instead of that would just be, get angry and get quite on the attack. And he was very, forward, because early on, I think that I should probably mention at this point that he didn't like me and I didn't like him. And we would actually joke about it in the kind of more fun meetings that we, the more straightforward ones. Because, like I've kind of joked before, but it's true, I thought he was, an oily, kind of sneaky bellend. And he thought I was a jumped up naff with ideas above his station. And I think we were both right. I don't think those truths are mutually exclusive. But he would kind of try a wee sly line that clearly would go over the heads of people he was usually dealing with without meaning to blow my own trumpet. And if I do, I apologise. But I'm quite good in an argument in terms of I can raise the stakes in an insult competition pretty well, right? I'm pretty confident I'm going to win that. And I think that he would say something and you could see the smug, the way they turn up the smirk. And I'd say something back. And particularly if other people, the people on his side of the desk, i.e. other directors, see if they laughed, then the smirk immediately went into just rage. And you could, how dare you, belittle me in front of somebody. But because he'd started it, he couldn't give it the how dare you, because it wasn't an unprompted insult, And the meetings that we had, I felt that he always gave the impression of, I need to do this. I'm basically being ordered by the boss to do this. So remember, you're kind of basically here on sufferance. And that's not a great point to start off. I mean, because you start off with antagonism. And who knows, maybe we brought antagonism to the table, in all honesty. We weren't fans of the regime. Yeah. So I've got to hold my hands up to that. But it meant that initiatives that we did together that could have been done a lot quicker were slowed down. And I think particularly 2006, because the sort of anti-sectarian initiative, they get bogged down in details because it's a pissing contest, and neither wants to be seen to give way to the other, when in fact you're kind of working together. But that's what I mean about politics. And I felt that they were unnecessary. And I felt a lot of the things he did, his kind of manipulations, to give you an example, creating the Rangers Assembly when they heard the trust was being formed to try and get trust status first, because you're only legally allowed one at a club. That was all Bain. Murray wouldn't have a fucking clue about it. He doesn't care, right? And he wouldn't have heard of the concept of trust. So that's all him. And then at meetings, we'd be sitting there and we'd say, our members want this. And he'd say, well, I need to hear that from the Assembly. And why? And he's like, well, everyone, they've got more members than you. And I'm like, yes, because you automatically count our paying members as members of the Assembly. You count season ticket holders. Nobody has ticked a box saying, I want to be a member of the Assembly. And that kind of thing would irritate him, because I was right, And again, it was a lot of moving pieces about on a board, when in fact we could have been quicker just sweeping them off and saying, what do we need to do?
Was he different with Mark? Was he different with any of the other guys in the trust?
That's a very interesting question. I think he was always kinder to our female members, but patronising. And I know, speaking to our female members, that they felt that he was kind of one step away from kissing their hand, and calling them dear lady in a Sir Humphrey way. And I know that our female members felt that, well, look, here's something that happened that I think people know about. It was in the papers that there was a split in the trust. Splitters. So yeah, the People's Front of Judea meeting, there was a split, and there were two camps. The one camp, and I won't name individuals, but it's not fair because they don't have the right of reply. But one camp was headed really by me, Mark, and Stephen Smith, and that was the militant wing of the party, which was, screw them. They've been in charge for ages. They've lied to us. They've no plan how to get us out of this. Burn it down. We'll work with them if they want, but we've offered so many times. Screw them. And the other side was, we need to work with them. And then what we'll do is we'll get, they're going to offer us various baubles, and we'll take them and we'll work with them, and that way we'll get the job done. And the problem for that camp was that, because I was the public face and because I did all the publicity, I sort of controlled the narrative, and I didn't go back and seek permission, because we both knew that in a fight, all I had to do was kind of appeal to the members, really, and they would back me. And again, me back then, particularly being coked up, drunken, arrogant prick, it was sort of unsaid. But can something be unsaid and yet you can reference it? And
the understanding can be referenced.
The understanding was referenced. What a brilliant description. This is why I was glad that you agreed to do this. The understanding was referenced a lot by me, that you can complain all you like. I'm not going to change. I'm going to go out and do it. It wasn't uncommon for something to happen on the Monday, me to give an interview, or several, to be in the papers and the telly that night, next day, get an email from other people in the thing saying, you didn't discuss this with us, you just said. Me, of course, saying, there wasn't time, you need this, but you need to trust me on this stuff. And they said, well, we disagree with this. And me basically saying, tough. We've said it now, you've got to commit to it. And Murray took advantage of this through Bain. Again, Murray is maybe saying, we need to do something about them. He's not saying, this is what we need to do about them. He's leaving it to Bain. Yeah. And what Bain did was he encouraged, as I say, the kind of more consensus-based camp that, there were various things on offer. There was seats on the board that would become available to fans groups, if only it wasn't for Edgar and Dingwall with their troublemaking and out there, And hey, listen, there was a split anyway, and what he very cleverly did was just stick a crowbar in and wedge it even further apart. And that's why there was a very kind of explosive board meeting at which the two camps basically sort of separated, and it was in the paper on the Monday, and that came from Bain, 100%. That came from Bain, and in the end, we won because, again, rightly or wrongly, I can't change it now. I said to them, okay, right, we'll take this public. I'm going to win. Me and Mark's got follow. I've got the media. I'm going to say this, what are you going to do? And they accepted. And we lost a lot of good people from that. But equally, we lost people that I think by that stage were too committed to, and I still think this, even though a lot of my actions I'm certainly not proud of. I do feel that they had gone down too much. They'd been captured, They were too in line with what the club wanted to do. They were too impressed by the grandeur of it. And this is the thing about the position that me and Mark had taken, because we knew that there was no chance of us ever being invited to the table. It sort of offered a freedom, to go and do the things we wanted to do. Whereas for the guys who hadn't, it is tempting, when the chairman of your football club says to you, you can be a director of Rangers. It is tempting. I get it. I absolutely get it. The reason that we were able to not fall into that trap was we knew there was no chance of it. It just could not happen. For various reasons, Mark and I both knew that, as he used to joke, he used to say, fuck, can you imagine the record going through our lives currently and looking for skeletons? He said, so we knew. And then that's before you even get to a relationship with the people there. But he had very cleverly done that. And then, after it was resolved, and as I say, rightly or wrongly, our camp had come out and talked. And I don't want to make it, by the way, that we didn't have support within, the board. We did a lot. Otherwise, they would just have voted me off. Unpopular as it might have been, they could have done it. I had people there that I knew I could trust when it was backs to the wall time. So after it all resolved, we have a meeting. He kind of mentions smugly about, your recent troubles. And I said, well, you'd know all about that, wouldn't you? And he's like, well, what do you mean? I said, it must be disappointing now that to find out what happens with the trust, you need to ask us as opposed to just getting emails from people telling you what happened. What are you talking about? And it was like that. And that very sort of confrontational thing. The other thing that I strongly suspect, 2006, and I remember very specifically, I got a phone call in September from the Daily Record. Now, do you remember the Daily Record launching in various cities in Scotland a free paper around about this time?
Vaguely.
Vaguely, yeah. They were going to compete with the Metro.
Yeah.
That was the plan anyway. So I remember actually two guys, me being me, I don't remember their names, but one was the sports editor and the other was the assistant editor, the deputy editor. And they came out, actually came to Shawlands to see me, and we went to, God, I can't remember the name of the pub. It was the one behind the granary. Someone from Shawlands in that era I'll remember. Big place, I think it was a Stephen King place. Anyway, so we went in there and had a few drinks, and they said, we'd like you to write a column in the paper. I was like, wow. And I'm like, yeah, but basically it's twice a week. One's for the free paper, one's for the main one. And I was like, why? And they said, well, we can't talk to Rangers fans. We know that. We know there's a gap. This is 2006, by the way. Well done on redressing that, lads. They said, we know we can't talk to that, and we know that you can. And I said, okay, but, I need to be honest, and no, that's what we want from you. We want you to be honest, just so long as you're not libelous. I said, right, well, that's fair enough. We ended up getting blitzed. It wasn't like we had a drink in it. I mean, we ended up, getting. I would drink with anybody back then. any excuse to stagger home at 11:45 and say to Mrs. I wanted to come home, but daily rate. So it's all agreed, signed up, contract. I went to their offices, which weren't long open, the new ones, and did a photo shoot. Believe it or not, right? Fucking photo shoot, me, and it was all the standing with arms folded next to the. Oh God, 3 hours of fucking pictures. And the annoying thing actually afterwards was, see, after I'd left the trust, after I'd stopped drinking, I immediately lost like 4 stone in 3 months. But every time, because I was still at the trust for about a year after I stopped drinking, every time they used a photo of me looking like a fat bastard. So that always really irritated me. But so there I am. Although if they're going to pick this up and they use it, go with those pictures, lads, because I'll take the fat for the hair now. So it's all arranged. They actually agreed to pay me, and I went to the trust board and I said they're going to pay me this. And the compromise was basically that I would give half of it to the trust and I could keep the other half, because I was having to do the work for it. I was having to write the frigging call.
Yeah.
And they were like, right, fair enough. So I was going to get paid and I was going to put the money into the trust, half the money into trust, half the money to me, right? Everything's all arranged. So I'm having a meeting at Ibrox, and the reason I remember it so specifically, it was the week before I got married for the first time. And Bain asked me about a meeting, and I said, I'm afraid I've got to... I can't make that. I'll be on my honeymoon. He was very nice, very gracious about it. And I can't remember. I think it was one of the other trust people had kind of said, and then when you get back, your column will be starting. His ears pricked up. He's like, what? I said, I've got a newspaper column starting in the Daily Record. He's, wow. And, naively, and maybe a wee bit kind of pure check me out. So, twice a week, once in the paper, once in the free paper. They can't talk to Rangers fans. I'm going to do it. Look at me. The new Stuart Alsop, and I left it. 2 days later, phone call comes. Can't do it. I was like, why not? And they said, officially, we can't get a Celtic fan to balance it up. And because, it obviously got on well with the guy, he says, unofficially, Rangers will pull their advertising. Now, that might not be true. That might be something he said to kind of deflect the blame from the Record onto Rangers, knowing that he was probably pushing at an open goal. So it might be bollocks, but it might also be true. The circumstantial evidence fits for it. Whether or not it's true, I'll never know. Okay,
so again with this documentary in the back of our minds, Bain, the first season, and obviously his replacement in this season, it's all about perception. And my God, if that's your club, you're quite cringing watching through the cracks in your fingers and all that. We've had your impressions of them, certainly early ones. What did you pick up from other people? I mean, presumably you're not going into these meetings with just Bain and Murray. We'll come to Murray in a moment, but especially those under him, where he does exert this influence. Did you ever pick up on that same kind of eye roll and, oh Jesus, this guy's a bit of a joke figure, or was there any kind of devotion? Did he manage to motivate and pull performances out of the guys that were working underneath him, or were you just too detached from that to get a handle on it?
No. There was eye rolling, particularly from people who didn't work at Rangers but worked for Murray International. There was a fair bit of eye rolling. From staff under him, I would say that it was 70-30 in my experience. That 70% of them thought he was a tool. Couldn't stand him for the reasons that I thought. And there was this other of, you're more career-minded, you're more, I'm climbing the ladder type. And they were very much decide, because they were up his arse in the way that he was up Murray's arse, in the way that, the totem pole of people up people's arses. And there were plenty of people, you would say, got meeting with Bain next week. Oh, fuck, don't envy you that, Fanny. What words, strong words were used. Fud was particularly, Baldy Fud was a particularly brutal one that was issued quite a lot. But there would be other people who maybe weren't season ticket holders. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Who weren't there because of a devotion to the club, and therefore had no reason to talk to us either. But Bain had the policy, we've mentioned it before, of hiring non-Rangers fans. His ideal hire, believe it or not, wasn't a Celtic fan. His ideal hire was somebody who didn't like football.
Yeah.
That was his ideal hire.
That's not an opinion, just to go down that little avenue there. That's not an opinion that's completely ridiculous. There are a lot of fans, I think, would see that football fans aren't the best judges at times of big decisions, and when you're too emotionally invested in, this isn't a normal business, for example, and it's probably why the rest of Murray's businesses probably did roll their eyes, because he would take up a lot of Murray's time that was probably needed elsewhere. But football fans aren't the best judges. We are clouded. We go with what we want to be true, and having someone, especially in some of the most senior positions of management, that really are only looking at the figures.
Yeah, but we're not talking about only at that level, and that was why the policy for me didn't work, because yes, you do have the people who will at that top level who need a distance. Totally agree, understand that. But at that level, Martyn, there aren't that many qualified candidates available anyway.
Yeah.
So you pick the best one. Below that, you had people that would work their contracted hours and half-arse it the way we all half-arse our job because they didn't care. And you had people who would work their nuts off because it was Rangers. And if, they had a phone call for the club in the middle of the night saying, can you turn up with a Phillips head screwdriver because we've only got the other ones, they would have, they would come in. So I get what you're saying. And it's not an unreasonable opinion, but they took it too far. They took it right down the club. I would suggest that it is better for a fan to be in certain positions because they will have a greater work ethic and a greater understanding. But he felt that even at those levels, there'll always be hassling players for the thing. But by all means, hire non-Rangers fans, but hiring fans of our season ticket holders of our direct opponents, I didn't ever think was that sensible. No. And we raised that with him several times, but he would always say, so you're saying we should discriminate against these people? And of course we would say, well, you're discriminating against Rangers fans. So, you're the one who's brought discrimination into the process. We're just suggesting that there might be advantages to, and it would go on endlessly. It was an argument that was rehashed and repeated over and over and over. So, I didn't, necessarily agree with that. I don't think many Rangers fans did, but I would say that in his management, if you were somebody that was, careerist, was only looking at this as a stop, how high could you get in that organisation? How quickly could you get out of it? And at many of his favourites, and some of whom were quite clearly incompetent, and again, I wouldn't name the person, but there was somebody who was on his staff, incredibly arrogant person, really. Bain at least did have qualities in his job. He was good at what his job was. This person was not, and yet awful to deal with. Just horrible personality, hated by, there was no 70-30 here, hated by those who worked in and around this person. Absolutely one of his favourites. Totally have you ever seen that White Fast Show? I don't know where that came from. That Fast Show sketch about the ball busting Arabella Weir character,
Yeah.
who's, when there's other women there, she's like, do this, do that. I don't want to hear it. And a guy walks into her, hello, can you help me out with this, please? This was this person when Bain was there. And therefore, he was all, he enjoyed the flattery. There were, how can I put this? In an office, I think that men quite like people who are easy on the eye on occasion.
Fair.
In and around the office. And I don't think that was necessarily a hindrance for this person, because their ability at their job should have been. They were fucking awful at it, and yet stayed there and seemed to amass more power to fuck up other departments as well before eventually moving on and leaving. So, yeah, there were the two camps. I'm not entirely sure, by the way, that he knew that there were a group of people who thought he was a fanny. And I think that was illustrated by his awkward joking with the office staff in the Sunderland documentary, where it's quite clear they think he's a tool, but he doesn't know that. And, I got that impression a fair bit, that he'd be, making these really bad kind of jokes. Or, that way that you're the third person there and you're just dying inside because he's bouncing and looking at you to go, hey, look at how I bounce with the guys. And the guys kind of looking at you at the side of his eyes going, I'm so sorry about this. There was an element of that that happened more than one occasion.
Yeah, you've mentioned Smithers, obviously, which begs the question, Murray's impression of him, or what was your impression of Murray's thoughts on him? Because Smithers isn't the alpha male in any way, doesn't even pretend to be. Maybe Dwight Schrute's the best example to extend this office reference all the way to the end, but who would try and dominate everyone else, but when it came to his boss would be completely subservient. I don't get the impression from previous episodes of Murray and me that Murray actually was a mentor. Proper mentors do have an eye on the future and do see some talent and do wish to nurture for succession planning and everything else. He just looked, it was a very expedient relationship from what I can remember from our previous discussions.
He clearly thought he was good at his job, because he kept him. He first of all, they kind of headhunted him from...
Different from thinking he might be good at his Murray's job eventually.
He never, no, or certainly never gave me that impression, no, absolutely not. Murray, there was a hierarchy, and as I say, he was quite content for Bain to, be the king of that little fiefdom, because it was below him, it was the king, the lord, and then the feudal, the serfs kind of thing. And the top position was unchallenged. So, he clearly thought he was good at the tasks that were assigned to him. But I don't believe that he felt that... No, I certainly not. No, strongly. I never... I don't think there was ever any suggestion that he was being groomed to be the chairman, or to... I don't think that possibility was ever open or discussed or viewed by Murray. I genuinely don't think it entered his head.
He wouldn't be there, would he, if Murray thought, what, this guy's got it. He is sharp as a tack. He is ambitious. I see something of myself in him. He's getting as far away from my seat as possible. I get the impression, again, from you, I've never met either, that, he's good for me because he does all the work that I have absolutely no interest in doing, and there's just no way he's a threat to my position as king here. He's hated by everyone.
I'm not sure he knew that he was hated by everyone, but yeah, he didn't see him as on his level. No, not at all. And it would be one of those relationships where I'm sure that Bain might say, David is my mentor. And if you spoke to David Murray, he would say, what? he might learn off me, but I certainly haven't taken him aside and, decided to pass on my wisdom. Yeah, there was none of that. No, he ordered Bain. He told Bain to go and get us cups of water like he would do to anybody else, which Bain fucking hated, by the way. Absolutely hated. I'm not sure that wasn't a deliberate thing from Murray.
Of course it is.
I think that was a know your role, bitch. Deliberately doing that, because to do it in front of us, when he does know that, he does know the relationship between Bain and us, and to say to Bain, go and get the lads famously go and get the boys a cup of tea, go and get the boys some water, just unbelievable. I would say I felt sorry for him, but I didn't. I'd be lying. That'd be a fib.
I'm sure there are listeners that can relate to that. I've been in meetings with senior people and they've treated their next level down equally as badly. I mean, it can't be by accident. It probably is deliberate. But again, this is supposed to be the MD of Rangers Football Club.
It was, yeah. I mean, that's
not being treated.
Thing. Just being told, and us being told what the power structure was, and that's why, as I say, I don't ever think that Murray thought that this was it. I think everybody felt this is you've reached the terminus. You ain't going. There's nowhere for you to go. There is no other level for you now. I know that Murray was quite unhappy with the Willie Mackay story, about the mortgage in France. I'm not sure if he was angry that it happened or if it came out, but I know he was angry about it. And that, again, suggests to me a feeling of underling getting uppity, and wanting a wee bit of the kind of spoils of success. Because it must happen, when you're hanging about with these people. But, if he's a huge, multi-millionaire and you're not, then you can't act like him. You don't have the resources to do so. You might want to. You might try and put on the lifestyle. But I think he did remind him quite often, who was in charge. And Bain was accepting of that. I don't want to make out that there was this constant struggle, because there wasn't. He would joke about Murray. I remember once, we were having our fucking monthly discussion about how shite the PR was. And Bain said, look, I could hire the best PR company in the world tomorrow and it wouldn't work. They'd quit within a week, and you boys know this because there's a guy through there that thinks he's the best PR guy in the world. And we actually had to, yeah, you're right. So, no, I do think he was aware of what his position was. And again, though, he was good at that role, not the role we wanted him to do. As fans, that's something that I think people, including myself, maybe struggled to understand. That Bain wasn't trying to do the job we saw him having. He was doing the job he did have, the one that Murray had given him. And he didn't care what we thought of him. He really, he didn't care if the Rangers fans thought he was doing a good job. I mean, as I say, he wanted to be liked on a kind of personal level. But so long as Murray was happy, he knew he was doing his job, and that was the difference. And you have to say, firstly, he won against White, and secondly, the last 2 years of his time at the club, he had overseen the cutting of the debt from 34 million to 18 million, including a big job, while still being successful on the park. Now that's due to Walter, obviously, but. So credit, you clearly the man has some ability at the job, but where he struggled, and this is something that I think is one of the cruel ironies, and something that we did warn him about, not obviously the specific incident, but about the credibility gap. That when he warned against White, and he was right, nobody believed him because he was Martyn Bain, and he'd shat on and told so many lies. In the course of his normal duties, he knew he was, that was what he was expected to do, that he had no credibility whatsoever with the support. And we had warned him about that, you know, there will be times when you're asking, we said it through the sectarianism stuff, you know, when you ask the fans to do something, you don't have any pull. Yeah. But he never felt that he should work towards it. One thing I think he did get from Murray was the office made him important. And therefore, when the chairman of Rangers asks you to do something, whether you think he's right or not, you do it. When the MD of Rangers asks you to do it, because they are the chairman and the MD. Whereas we always try to say it's the man that makes the office, not the other way around. And I think that was a fundamental disagreement.
Yeah. A third man who was very big at that time, big in total. He bestrides Rangers history like a colossus, of course, was Walter Smith during your time at the Trust. What did you pick up from him in terms of his impressions of Bain's relationship with Bain?
I think he liked him. I think that he got on well with him. I don't think that he was unaware of what he was like. But again, Bain was a different person round people he wanted to impress. And therefore, the Martyn Bain who I would see isn't the Martyn Bain that Walter Smith would see. And you could even sense that change when, you know, in meetings that Walter was there. You could definitely sense change in meetings that Murray was there. Mm. So it's difficult for me to comment on, you know, what Walter would have been like if he'd known the Martyn Bain I knew, because he didn't, because Bain knew that Walter Smith was more important than he was. You know, I'm sure deep down he felt, me that runs the club, you know, we can always get another manager, but he understood that he understood that, you know, he had to get on with Walter. And I do think, you know, I've seen Bain crack a joke in a meeting in the manager's office at Ibrox, actually, and turn around to Walter and go, eh? And Walter kind of, aye, Martin. You know, and then turn around and look at us as much as, please don't associate me with that joke there. So, you know, Walter, I think, was, you know, somebody that does have that sort of natural reserve that he's not going to be included in that sort of, you know, band. That's not Walter Smith. No. And I think, as I say, that Bain, again, you know, he's very good at knowing his place, and he knew his place with Walter. And again, while I'm praising him for what he did in the last few years, he also appointed Ali, and he should have known. What we in the outside suspected was that Ali is never a manager. You know, great, obviously, as an assistant, wonderful goal scorer, but he doesn't have the personality or the skills to be a manager.
Bain appointed Ali, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're taking a direct reference from arguably the greatest Rangers manager there's ever been.
Oh, I know that. I absolutely know why he did it, and for the same reason we all accepted it, even though there were suspicions. Yeah, but I think he was the same. And, you know, you are the MD. It is your job to say, I'm sorry, Walter, but, you know, Ali, when he's taking the team, we've seen it. But maybe by that he knew, Martin, this is a February, remember?
Oh, okay.
Maybe he knew, I'm not going to be here anyway. So, you know, I'll leave it to, that's somebody else's mess. You know, that's my experience really with Martyn Bain. I'm sure there are other stories, but the only other one I'd really like to tell was years afterwards, 15, 16, something like that. I was working in Glasgow City Centre, and I went for a coffee at lunchtime, and I walked into Starbucks, and I noticed out the corner of my eye some people kind of pointing at me, but I had my headphones in, and, you know, me at the best of times, man, I try and avoid eye contact. But I did sort of clock this of people sort of pointing at me, and I was like, I wonder what it is. But I just, because of the way you know in Starbucks that you order and then you walk up to the wee table to wait for your order, And I figured, well, I'll see when I turn round up there. And that's what I did, and I turned around and it was Bain, and a couple of guys I didn't know. And clearly one of them had said, look, is that no David Edgar? So as I'm walking, up to our eyes meet, and I kind of, nod, and he sort of nods. And then he points up, shoots me a finger and goes, David, isn't it?
Oh,
I thought, I know. And clearly it's I don't remember you because I'm so important. So I, of course, went, yes, and you would be? And, total innocence, look in my face. And he went, Martyn Bain. And I went, of course, it's Martyn. How are you, and to complete
Baino,
that game. Baino, my man, love the beard. No. And that, to me, sums him up, that it's such a pointless little fucking waste of time. Especially given, nothing to do with each other. It's a chance to just say, hello, David, hello, Martyn. That's it, But it's that alpha male bullshit, insecurity. I don't remember you, even though I clearly do. And to be honest, see if I hadn't seen them and I'd walked in and he'd went, David, I'd probably just went, fair enough. The busy guy, I'm sure he meets hundreds of people. I would probably just have, but it was the fact that it was so obviously, a power trip. And I didn't get it because you weren't getting anything from it. You weren't going to get an advantage that could be used in a workplace, or we're never going to see each other again, more than likely. It was just so stupid. And to me, that's why even now I find it very hard to have any respect for him. Murray, I have great feelings of antipathy towards, but I still respect certain things in his tenure. Even the good things Bain did, I struggle to do so because of his personality. And that's maybe unfair, but that's where I am.
That's fair enough. Thank you, David. I think this was less stressful than the multiple episodes on David Murray. I certainly hope so.
Well, yeah, I mean, I still, get reminded of things that I did that I maybe look back on and put my teeth on edge about myself. So there's self-cringe involved when I do this show. But it's good, I don't ever want to get into a position where I delude myself that every action I did was, spot on or even made with the best of intentions. Because if I do that, then I'll lapse back into that behaviour. I think it is better to always say, do you know what, you were being a bit of a dick, and just move forward. So it's useful for me to do this.
Pleased to help, and listeners, you requested the show and we delivered. I hope it was as enjoyable as you hoped. Thank you, David, and thank you for listening. Until next time, bye for now.
If you enjoyed today's show, why not check out our Patreon site? For as little as the price of a matchday programme a month, you'll get access to loads of Gers content, including daily updates, tactical analysis, previews and post-match shows, plus an amazing archive covering all things Rangers, including stepping back in time to discuss particular games, managerial reviews, interviews with Ibrox legends, watch-alongs, and the odd bit of stuff and nonsense too. Please head over to patreon.com/heart and hand and join thousands of bears on the best value podcast on the world's most successful club.